Thanks for joining us. You've tuned into Arirang's Within the Frame. I'm Han Da-eun in Seoul. World powers are striving to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East, a region that now faces the risk of a full-scale war. A large Iranian attack on Israel is becoming imminent after the top leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, was killed, with Tehran saying it would strike Israel even if it means triggering a war. While Israel has neither confirmed nor denied its involvement, the United States and its allies are preparing to defend Israel from an expected counterstrike and prevent an even more destructive regional conflict. The U.S., South Korea, and other countries have urged citizens to leave Iran, Israel, and Lebanon immediately, while airlines have canceled flights bound for the three Middle Eastern countries. Is the Middle East on the brink of a full-scale war, and what could it mean for South Korea? For some insights, Brandon Ives, Assistant Professor of Political Science and International Relations at Seoul National University, joins us in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
And with us virtually is Paek Sung-hoon, a researcher at the Institute of Middle East Studies. It's always great to have you with us.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you for having me at the show.
All right, Dr. Paek, let's start off with you. Let's first explore the details of the deceased Hamas leader. Who was Ismail Haniyeh?
Haniyeh was born in 1962 in the Shati refugee camp in Gaza. Haniyeh's parents had fled from Ashkelon after the State of Israel was created in 1948. Haniyeh pursued his secondary education at the Al-Azhar Institute in Gaza and later on a degree in Arabic literature from Islamic University in Gaza. That is, he was mostly raised in occupied Gaza after the Third Arab-Israeli War, where his life in Gaza was under full control of IDF. While at university in 1983, Haniyeh joined the Islamic student bloc, a precursor to Hamas. He was arrested by the Israeli military and served several sentences in Israel jails in late 1980s. Haniyeh was first arrested for 18 days at the age of 25 in 1987 when he took part in protests against the Israel occupation. A year later, in 1988, he was jailed again for 6 months, and he was sentenced another 3 years in prison in 1989. So he was at the center of Hamas rising from the beginning. And after his release in 1992, Israel deported Haniyeh to southern Lebanon. And during that time, the Haniyeh and his group received unprecedented media coverage, establishing a global reputation. So after the signing of the Oslo Accord between Israel and Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, Haniyeh returned to Gaza in 1993, and at the age of 31, he was appointed to the Dean of Islamic University, the university that he graduated from. And Haniyeh climbed the ranks within the movement as a close aide and assistant of Hamas co-founder, the Sheikh Ahmad Yassin. And ever since the death of Yassin, he was the leader of militant group Hamas until 2019 February, when he abdicated from the position. And after his abdication, he became the head of political bureau, and he did a lot of diplomatic mission for Qatar, such as peace negotiation with Israel after the 7th of October war kind of like initiated from the Qatar. And he was assassinated in 2024. At the inauguration ceremony of the new elected Iranian president, and now we are talking about him right now.
So Haniyeh was the most visible leader of the Hamas group during Israel's war in Gaza, and as you pointed out, the key in ongoing ceasefire and hostage release negotiations, which we'll discuss later on. But before that, Professor Ives, we're getting contradicting reports over how Haniyeh died. While Iran argues that a short-range projectile fired from outside his guest house in Tehran was what killed him, other reports indicate that an explosive device planted covertly inside his guest house was what killed him. What's your analysis?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're seeing these conflicting reports. And as you mentioned before, we do see from Western media outlets, including the New York Times, that an explosive was planted in this room, and that's what ended up killing him. Now, it's hard to say what exactly killed him. Time might tell with additional evidence. But it may be the case that Iran is very concerned about what this looks like for their ability to provide security. Iran is going to respond to this incident in some sort of way, and the way in which he was killed might pressure them to react in different ways. So if it is the case that they are trying to cover up the way he was killed, it may be due to a motivation to respond in a different way from different pressures. Now, if he was killed with an explosive that was placed in this room, that would be an indication that Israel was able to penetrate in a very unique way some of Iran's security apparatus, specifically related to the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And that would be an incredibly embarrassing blow to the IRGC and to Iran more broadly. So you can see why they might want to cover this up. Now, Iran doesn't exactly have a free media environment. Information is restricted sometimes, but they did release some photos of the complex. At initial glance, the damage is very restricted in the overall structure to one sort of room. And so that suggests to me that it could have been an explosive rather than a short-range projectile, which probably would have resulted in more damage to the entire building. So if I had to guess, which we have limited information here, I do think it was probably an explosive that was placed in the room. And Iran probably wants to cover this up because it might pressure them to respond in a certain way, as well as be a major embarrassment. This could have consequences for pressures from within the government or related to some of its proxies with how they view Iran's ability to protect people that are in the country there. So those are my suspicions, and I think there's a lot of incentives for Iran to not try and cover up a potential embarrassment that might stem from Israeli security forces being able to place a bomb and infiltrate their security forces like that.
I'm glad you highlighted how Haniyeh was killed matters to Iran. And regardless of how he was killed, Iran looks determined to strike back. Professor Peck, Iran has said it would strike Israel even if it means triggering a war. And according to various reports, the attack could come as early as today. South Korea, the U.S., and other countries have urged citizens, as I mentioned at the top, to leave Iran and Lebanon on any ticket available. Is the Middle East on the verge of a full-scale war?
I'm not a fortune teller with a crystal ball, so can't tell what exact option that Iran will use for the retaliation and how will it lead to a war or limited level of escalation. But like what you mentioned, current situation is very dire. I mean, like Hezbollah's top military commander, Fawad al-Sukur, and the chairman of Hamas political bureau, Ismail Haniyeh, were killed within an hour of each other on the night between 30th and 31st July. And it is well-planned operation of Israel. It surely has pushed away any chances of achieving a ceasefire in a short term among related parties, whether or not this was an actual possibility. So the unprecedented attack on Iranian territory, killing the diplomatic envoy in an official visit, shows Netanyahu's readiness to take major escalatory steps in the regional confrontation with its rivals. So apart from the April retaliation that Iran did after they've been hit by Israel, Iran has shown in the past that its goal is to avoid a direct conflict with Israel. But well-shamed killing of Haniyeh is a blow to Iranian security services that will probably require a harsher response. So now the ball is in Iranian court. The level of retaliation from Iran will be the key to the outbreak of war. Chances not high, but we still have a little chance that the retaliation will not lead to a full-scale war. As we recall, from the past, the death of its leading nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, was met with limited wrath in 2020. And the killing of Quds Force Commander Qasem Soleimani, of course, it lead to a fire rhetoric, but instead a limited hit on the remote U.S. bases was the retaliation from the Iran. So Iran has stepped back before and may do so again. So yes, the regime response to Haniyeh's death will define its role as a regional power. And if Iran fails to appear potent enough, risk is that Iran will lose its influences in the region. So we have to wait and see how Iran will retaliate and how far they will retaliate. What are their measure to retaliate back of Israel, and that will going to lead to whether a full-scale war or limited warfare that had happened in April when there was a back and forth of the missile attack between Israel and Iran. But we have to see. There's I cannot tell whether this is going to lead to a full-scale war or not.
Like you said, no one has the crystal ball, so we'll have to see related developments over the next few days or the few coming weeks to tell if the developments will escalate into a full-scale war. Now, Professor Ives, the U.S. is seeking to limit attacks and response, sending a command chief to the Middle East, also sending additional warships and fighter jets to the region, and all this as Iran rebuffed U.S. calls to exercise restraint. Now, as we've seen numerous times through Biden and Netanyahu, is the U.S. losing its influence over the Middle East?
Well, I don't know how much influence the United States has to control actors in the region. The actors have things that they want to get done. They want to establish ground rules that govern the relations between them, and I think the United States has limited ability to influence. It has some, but not complete control over the actions of these actors. Now, things have basically been simmering for quite some time. The last kind of major war, well, there was a couple Hamas wars and the Gaza war, but Israel and Hezbollah fought back in 2006. And since then, things have kind of been simmering, but the U.S. and the international community have not really taken any steps to address some of the causes that are resulting in this kind of slowly simmering pot of tensions that have not yet boiled over. Now they're starting to boil over now. Now, what can the U.S. do? What can Iran do? It's not clear. The United States is going to try to establish some form of deterrent by sending a ship there, but Iran is going to respond in some ways. Israel has changed the rules of the game to a certain extent by attacking Haniyeh in this manner. Now, Iran's going to try and deter Israel. They want Israel to stop attacking people within Iran, as well as other Iranian proxy commanders. Israel keeps doing this. This happened before. Iran responded with approximately 300 projectiles, and we would go back and forth in this manner. Iran is going to try to do some sort of deterrent that's strong enough to deter Israel from future attacks, but also probably not strong enough to start a full-blown war. But this is a very fine balance right now. Both countries are trying to deter the other, but not start a full-scale war. And this is a very, very tough ballgame right now because they're also sending signals to the other one, and signals can be misinterpreted.
Right. And in related question, how would the seemingly spreading conflict in the Middle East impact the upcoming U.S. presidential election?
Great question, and something that is on everyone's minds. Well, as has already been said, we don't have a crystal ball. And part of the reason why this is so hard to think about is that we've never really seen a full-scale war between Israel and Iran, or between Israel and Hezbollah, really. What we saw in 2006 could be quite minor compared to what we see now if Israel and Hezbollah really put their full force, or something approximating their full force, into a conflict. So part of this is going to depend on what actually this escalates to. Now, let's say it's a major conflict where Hezbollah is attacking Israel, including Tel Aviv. Iran is sending missiles and drones. We might also see attacks coming from the Houthis. We might also see attacks coming in Iraq. Israel will be shut down for weeks, maybe a month, maybe longer. That's going to be a very salient conflict in the United States. Now, people like to joke that foreign wars don't really affect, I shouldn't say joke, some people really think this, that foreign wars don't really affect U.S. domestic politics and elections. But that changes when U.S. troops are dying. So if there's U.S. troops in Iraq that are getting killed, if the United States gets involved more heavily and U.S. targets themselves get hit, this could very much change how the U.S. public responds to this. Related to that, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has a lot of salience in much of the world, including in the U.S., for whatever reason. And it's affecting domestic politics in the United States and intra-party dynamics within the Democrat Party. So it's yet to be seen what Harris's strategy is going to look like with regard to Israel and Palestine. She has not given many media interviews since she basically became the Democratic nominee, and it's going to be interesting to see how she balances the kind of more progressive wings of the Democrat Party with what you might call the more moderate wings of the party, because they do have some pretty big divisions on the Democratic Party's stance towards the Israel-Palestinian conflict. One example of that can be seen with the potential vice president pick of Harris. Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, for instance, who is a pretty big supporter, pretty vocal supporter of Israel. He's also of Jewish background. And there's been some reports that Harris may be reluctant to select him as a VP candidate because she may lose votes with some of the more progressive areas of the Democratic Party. So this could affect her vice president selection, and it's also going to put her in the spotlight where she's probably going to have to comment a lot more if tensions escalate. If the tensions escalate to the point where there are U.S. fatalities or U.S. targets are getting hit, that could also be detrimental to probably the incumbent party.
Well, we're seeing a string of rapid-fire events, both in the Middle East and in the race for the White House. So this is certainly a critical time we're facing. And Dr. Baek, the South Korean government has convened emergency meetings with relevant ministries to check the impact and prepare for possible fallout from worsening Middle East tensions. How do you foresee the impact on South Korea's security and the economy?
If the war becomes serious and Iran started to blockade the global energy and logistic choke point, which is Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb channel of the Gulf of Aden, then the economy will be hit hard. Korean economy will be hit hard because of the rise of seaborne fare and the energy oil prices. So as you could see, 20% of the world crude oil by seaborne trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz with an average of 21 million barrels of oil per day. And if Iran were to close the Strait of Hormuz in the wake of the military conflict between Iran and Israel, global oil supplies would struggle to keep up with that demands. And this could lead to higher oil prices and higher inflation. And especially like Far East Asia country, including South Korea. According to the IAEA, the first half of the last year, an estimated of 80% of oil traveling through the Strait of Hormuz was destined to Asian market. And South Korea is in 70% of our energies depending on oil trade with the Middle Eastern oil that is coming through the Strait of Hormuz. So it will be a huge blow to our economy. And not only that, the seaborne trade will be hit hard too, because 80% of EU export and 50% of EU imports are actually coming from a seaborne trade route. But if the blockades that happen and if the Houthi attack against the Gulf of Aden happen, the sea freight rates to the EU will going to increase massively, because we've been witnessing all of this year because there was a rise of the seaborne freight rates going up 250% high compared to that of the same rate of last year, October. So if the war happens and if the Houthis and Hezbollah will going to join in and full-scale war happen, and they're going to use every means they could use, so they started to blockade Strait of Hormuz, the Gulf of Aden, then the impact that we're going to economic impact that we're going to bring to Korean economy will be massive.
And staying with you, Dr. Baek, some experts analyze that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wants to spark a larger war to drag the U.S. and Iran into it. What's your take? And because we are running short on time, if you could mention a bit more briefly.
Okay, I do not like to talk conspiracy, but the culprit is the one with the most to gain. And apparently the one who benefit the most is in the larger war is Netanyahu. Netanyahu knows that the peace deal with Hamas will collapse his government and end his reign as a prime minister. So nothing kills this talk more effectively than ending the life of the negotiator on the other side of the table. So this is what had happened. So I don't like to talk about conspiracy, but the one who gained most are the Netanyahu right now. So those kind of like the opinions are kind of has some kind of like legitimacy on like analyzing why Israel are kind of attacking and assassinating two head figures of Hezbollah and the Hamas.
And our last discussion point of the day, Professor Ives, the war in Gaza rages on with dozens killed in fresh Israeli strikes. What does the killing of Haniyeh mean for efforts to end the war in Gaza? And again, if you could mention a bit briefly.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. Well, it's tough. Sometimes you think that eliminating commanders or leaders might pressure groups to participate in ceasefires. We saw that with Taif, perhaps, when he was assassinated or killed, and Hamas still was participating in the ceasefire. The Haniyeh killing is a pretty big one. He's a very high figure within the political branch of Hamas. Now, it's not only that he was killed, but it's also that there's going to be a large reaction right now. So the ceasefire is going to be taking place with a number of different actors, which is going to greatly complicate any efforts to conduct a ceasefire. So I think it's going to hurt it in a lot of ways. Iran is also not going to be happy about Hamas conducting a ceasefire in the middle of a conflict. They want to pressure Israel from a number of different angles that they can, and this is a big moment. Israel is going to be very distracted, and its forces are going to be divided right now, dealing with targets from Hezbollah, Iran, and also boggled down in Gaza.
All right, we'll leave it there for tonight. Thank you so much, Professor Ives, for coming in and sharing your perspectives.
Thank you so much.
And many thanks to you as well, Dr. Begg, as always, for your insights.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.